Hey everyone, Ripley with Bob's Watches. I'm here with Justin in the studio for another episode of Watch Talk. Today we're talking all about Oris, so let's get started. Also, if you haven't done so already, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can stay up to date on our latest video content.
All right, Ripley, we got some really interesting Orises today, but before we get into it, let's start with the wrist check.
Yeah, so
what do you got on?
We're talking about Oris. I'm wearing an Oris. This is the Divers 65. This is the 42mm version on the reclaimed textile strap, so it's a recycled material strap.
It's a really interesting strap. That's a factory Oris strap, right?
It is. It's. I believe they only make this one model this way with this strap, but it's cool. It's kind of like a
fun
blue and gold zebra.
Yeah.
I like it, but and it also matches the kind of the patina.
It does work really well.
Yeah. It's a cohesive look. What about you?
I'm wearing one of my absolute favorite Oris, which is the Chron Oris. I love that case design with the double crowns and that inner rotating bezel. It's just it's such a good watch. All right, well, let's start off with one of Oris's most classic watches, the Divers 65. What can you tell us about this watch, Ripley?
Yeah, so the Divers 65, so Oris has two different collections of dive watches, as do many brands. And the Divers 65 is their vintage-inspired one that draws its inspiration from Oris's original divers from, as the name suggests, 1965.
Sure.
So everything about the watch takes its cues from their vintage models. No crown guards, kind of even has like a rivet bracelet on this one, but it's
dome crystal.
Yeah, exactly. But it's probably one of their best sellers. It's been host to a ton of limited editions. It's in a ton of sizes, 36, 38 now. 40 and then 42 like I'm wearing. This is the 40mm version. They also have it in a number of different materials from solid bronze, steel, or this one, steel and bronze.
I love that about this line is it is the vintage inspired, but they're not afraid to kind of go outside the box a little and use some new materials and some new styling. And I personally think this two-tone with the bronze is a fantastic combination.
Yeah, it is one of my favorite current Divers 65s. The 42 is a bit too big for my wrist, and if you plop it down right next to it, you can kind of see it is quite a bit larger than the 40. Another thing you'll notice is that the date window is at 6 here, it's at 3 here, it's also at 3 on the 36mm models. But in addition to this kind of classic, circles and geometric style markers, you can get it with kind of this really funky 60s era one with these weird oversized Arabics. And so for what effectively is a vintage-inspired dive watch, you get a ton of diversity within the single collection, countless dial colors, materials, and then they're not afraid to be funky. I mean, look at the strap and a two-tone with bronze. How many other two-tone bronze watches can you think of off the top of your head?
And even just the subtle diversity, like you said, they go from like the geometric hour markers to those really kind of crazy negative space Arabics. And then the switching of the date window was really cool too. Personally, I love it at 6 right here. I think it's a really nice spot. It just integrates so nicely and it's kind of refreshing.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of 6 o'clock date windows. Unless it's really cleverly implemented, 6 o'clock's my preference. One thing I think that's unique about this is it has a two-tone bronze bracelet. There's certain steel and bronze Oris Divers 65s where it's either just the bezel or the bezel ring, or it might be more of a highlight. But it is a two-tone watch, bracelet 2, with bronze and steel, and that in and of itself is kind of interesting because what you get is you can kind of see the bezel starting to patina now, as are the center links. But what you're going to get as it ages is a really cohesive look rather than just like a single component on an otherwise steel watch that's aging. And I also think it complements kind of the faux tina on the hour markers themselves.
It does. It all works together pretty nicely. And Oris does that. Like you said, this one is full-on two-tone with the center links and the bezel, and they do two-tone a couple different ways. Like you said, the other one, some of them are so subtle where it's just the bezel, but the bezel insert, still is an aluminum bezel insert or whatever.
It's so it's that ring.
Literally just the smallest little accent, which is kind of cool. And I guess technically it's still, in that two-tone class, but it's a very different two-tone than this. So it's nice that there's such diversity in the way that they've kind of mixed this lineup.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the more out there, if you will, options. But if you want something really, really classic, you can just get a plain steel one with a black dial.
That's true.
And for the people that want like maybe a vintage pre-crown guard sub, we're talking tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on which one you want. And even if you do have the means to buy that, you can't really wear it with reckless abandon. If you flood your $200,000 sub, you're never going to be able to get that dial back. If you want a vintage dive watch aesthetic in a go with anything, wear it. You can always get it repaired and serviced. This is a great contender. You can get a 36 or 40 size, so you don't have to go with something larger, modern, oversized. But of course, you get all the amenities of modern materials like a sapphire crystal, unidirectional bezel.
Yeah, that vintage dive styling, like you said, there's a million different variations in terms of aesthetics. It's got a great price point. It's very accessible. If you're looking for a vintage dive watch or a vintage style dive watch in like a modern piece, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better line than the Divers 65.
Absolutely, and if you don't want a vintage dive watch from Oris but still want an Oris diver, they have you covered there, and that is our second watch.
We have Oris's second dive watch line, which is the more modern of the two. Instantly, you can tell, I'm sure, just by seeing some of the, the styling of this one. It's got the ceramic bezel, integrated bracelet. It looks a lot different, another dive watch. What's noteworthy about this one, Rip?
Yeah, so I mean, the Divers 65, it 100 meters water resistant. You can dive with it. I know people that have dove with it. The Aquis, it takes everything up a step further. It's unapologetically modern in its aesthetic. And for being a steel integrated bracelet sports watch, it doesn't look like any of, like a Nautilus or a Royal Oak or any of these other designs that frequently get iterated upon. This looks like an Aquis. It kind of has its own aesthetic. It's very modern, but it's kind of got this interesting case shape where it's got these crowns and, it's got these lugs that are there, but they're thick, and the bracelet's integrated. You can kind of see elements shared between it and other models, but at the same time, I couldn't come up with a single watch that looks like the Aquis.
No, it's its own watch, and like you said, there's so many watches out there that you see that have clearly been very heavily inspired by like a Royal Oak or some other piece. Where this one, if you take all the branding off this, you instantly know it's an Oris Aquis.
Yeah, and with that comes you get sapphire crystal, often ceramic bezels. They'll do other ones out of tungsten and some really interesting materials. In that same vein, you also, because it is a modern version, you get a sapphire display case back. The Divers 65 doesn't have that. And of course, you can get it on a steel bracelet or with a rubber, leather, or even a leather strap.
This one has some pretty nice colors as well, right? So here we have this kind of brown dial, a little bit
vibes.
Exactly. Yeah. But it also comes in every color under the sun almost, right? Like they got a really nice blue. The green is a personal favorite of mine. I really like that.
And a ton of sizes. They've got from like Lady Aquis models all the way up until some that I probably should wear on my ankle, not my wrist. This is one of the larger ones, but as you can see, it's not at all enormous. And the way that there aren't really traditional lugs means that all of them do wear quite a bit smaller than their case dimensions might indicate. So for example, if you look at this watch is 42, but the lug to lug is actually rather larger than that. On the Aquis, you pick it up, the lugs do stick out a bit, but they more or less drop off shortly past the case. And so for a actual dive watch where you do want a larger display, it makes sense why the Aquis is their their go-to model.
It's a good size. One thing to note, this one is a thicker watch.
It is thick,
right?
Yeah.
So I would say out of all the dimensions, the one that's noticeably the largest is the thickness. If you see, this is fairly thick.
Yeah, and compare that to the Divers 65 right up here, and yeah, you can tell a lot there.
Yeah.
But so that's for good reason too. The Divers 65 is water resistant to 100 meters. This Aquis has 3 times the depth rating, and there's other models that go 5 times and well above that. So it is their more professional dive-worthy line.
It doesn't bother me at all. I actually don't mind a thick watch. It's kind of, I like having that heft on my wrist, but I know some people do kind of take exception. If it gets too thick, it can be a little heavier, a little more uncomfortable. But all in all, I think this one wears really well, and especially for the size.
Yeah, I like the Aquis. My biggest gripe with it is that it's not like a standard lugs where you can just swap the strap out at your will. I frequently do that. But at the same time, where I think it excels is it's got a nice bracelet on it. You can get it with a rubber strap, but for sort of for a steel integrated sports watch, you want to be able to kind of, wear it as it should be worn in active events. And for something as precious as a Nautilus, where if you lose it or damage it or break it, you're out tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think the Aquis excels in that it's easily serviceable. It's really tough as far as its build construction, but it's not so precious that you wouldn't want to wear it out on a day on the water or actually diving.
Right.
And it is a highly capable dive watch in its own merits. Luminous display, unidirectional bezel, ceramic insert, 120
Yeah, it does
click.
have all the features, right?
Yeah, screw down crown. You're not really lacking anything here as far as pro dive watch capabilities. And of course, you can get models that market that have helium escape valves and bezel locking rings and all of that stuff. But for someone who wants a steel integrated sports watch and is looking at this price point, I have a hard time coming up with a model or just a brand in general that kind of plays
with
this
as
hard.
many features for the price. Yeah, and like the Divers 65, it's really attainable. You get a lot for your money. Yeah, it's a great choice.
Yeah, and only a handful of other models come to mind, maybe like the Tissot PRX, but again, it's not a diver, so kind of apples and oranges there.
Right.
And another one where between all the colors, the sizes, you can get different complications. If you can't find an Aquis you like or that you can wear, you're probably not looking hard enough. So I think the diversity is another part of that collection that really excels.
I totally agree. Well, let's change it up a little bit.
From the seas to the sky?
Yes, no more dive watches here, but let's go with another absolute classic, the Oris Pointer Date.
Yeah, so the Big Crown Pointer Date, I mean, this watch is probably the most quintessentially Oris design, in the same way that you think AP, you think the Royal Oak. This is probably the design that comes to mind first, at least for me, when I think of the Oris
Absolutely.
brand.
This is kind of the one, to me, it's like, this is what started it all with Oris, right? Like, this is, this is their original watch.
Yeah, vintage inspired. This one draws its inspiration from the models they were producing, I think at the end of the 30s, about 1938 was when the first one came out. It's a pilot's watch, so you see it's got that big, oversized crown, as you often find, highly legible display, but you can immediately tell it's more classically styled. You got the cathedral hands, and keep in mind that until the date just came around in 45, having the date displayed via an automatically changing window, that wasn't the norm. If you did have a calendar complication, it was done more in this fashion with the pointer style. And in the years since, this has sort of become Oris's signature complication, if you will. They're not the only ones who do it, but they're probably the ones that do it on the largest scale and that embrace it. And I really love it.
I do too. That style is much less common than the traditional date window, and that's when you see a date complication on a watch, the vast majority of time it's going to be a date window. Sometimes it's a 3, sometimes it's a 4:30 or something kind of funky like that.
Can't with the 4:30s.
But it's really different, and I love that about it. I think it's well done. It's interesting and. Personally, I think the Pointer Date is such a cool watch. I love the hands. I love that, very vintage like look and feel of the, the hour and the minute hand. And it's just a great vintage styled watch all the way around. I love they've stuck with the Pointer Date complication. It's one of my favorite dates.
Yeah, and I love how they've iterated upon this platform in numerous instances. You've got multiple case sizes. You can get them in bronze, you can get them in two-tone steel and bronze, multiple different dial colors, limited edition ones, but they kept that original aesthetic. Like if you find a vintage Pointer Date and you look at a modern one, it's immediately apparent how this is the modern version of that. And as you're saying, I think probably people's biggest gripes with date complications in general is when the date window or the way of displaying it isn't really, it seems like an afterthought. You got a date window floating somewhere in the center of a dial, crammed between two numbers, cutting off an index, something like that. And we were just saying how we like the 6 o'clock date window on the Divers 65 for that symmetry. This is arguably better symmetry. It takes the form of a fourth centrally mounted hand that just points its way around the 31 markings around the dial.
There's no date discs to match colors. Things like that can always kind of throw you off. Like, these little nitpicky things. And this one, like you said, it alleviates all of that. It's very elegantly done with, the date track around the outside and the extra hand. And I love it. And this is another one, too, like the divers we were just talking about that comes in a ton of different color options. It's like, this is like the classic, right? This is black, it always looks good. It's the most classic they offer. But every time I see a Pointer Date that I like, it seems like almost immediately after, I see another one that I like more. I mean, they have these in different colors. Like, they have the blue that I think looks fantastic. And
that red, that deep red.
That deep red color is gorgeous.
Green.
Then you start seeing them on the bronze. They have the bronze case with the green that looks fantastic. I mean, there's like a list as long as my arm.
The Roberto Clemente. Like, it again, like Oris, they get a nice design and they really kind of broaden it out, explore the different possibilities. You can get one that's really classical like this, or you can get something that is a very modern take on this very historic design.
Something more fun, something lighter, something not quite so classic or a little bit stuffy. And while the design of the watch is really classic, it turns into a really fun watch.
It is. And again, just like the Aquis, it's something that is identifiable as being from the Oris brand.
Absolutely.
It's one of their signature looks. And so if you were gonna buy a model that just immediately said Oris in the same way like a two-tone date just did for Rolex, it's the pointer date for me.
Yeah.
Keeping in the realm of Pilot's watches, in the same way that Oris has 2 dive watches, a vintage-inspired one and a modern one, they also have 2 Pilot's watches. So while the Big Crown pointer date was inspired by the original Oris Pilot's watches from the late 30s, the Big Crown ProPilot is a modern Pilot's watch. And I think it's a successful one.
I do too. It feels a little bit more like a Pilot's watch when you first see it. It's large, it has a pretty sterile dial with big numbers that are easy to read. And I think they did a good job at it. I personally like the way this looks. I like the simplicity of it. I like that it comes in different sizes, which is kind of nice. I know you appreciate when they offer a little bit of a reduced size that's not tiny.
Yeah, this one it's a large watch, but it's not huge at all.
Right.
It's, they make some that are legitimately too large for me to wear, like very much in line with like 45+ millimeter Pilot's watches. But for this one, as an everyday watch, I mean, here's a 42 millimeter Divers 65 right alongside it. This is not I don't even know, I'll hold this one up against my wrist. You could easily see this being a watch that you wore, kind of as your just daily wear.
Absolutely, it doesn't look oversized.
No, and it's not a direct, iteration of like a IWC Big Pilot, but it definitely has some of the similar design language of this like large dial, clean, high contrast markings, simple bezel. But these are very well suited to just be a daily watch. You can get them with day or date complications. The crown screws down for just kind of that daily security and water resistance. If you want an Oris and you don't necessarily want something that is so committed in far as being a diver or this historic vintage design, and you just want a nice everyday watch, I think this is a fantastic
That's a good way to put it. This is a very good everyday watch. It does have that Pilot styling, but like you said, it's not so far that it's like very niche-y, right? It can kind of go with everything, and it's easy to wear. It's a good size, and like kind of most of Oris's line, you get a lot of features for the price you're paying, right? Like this is a really good value.
And if you want something a bit more complex than just like a standard time and date, they have day dates, they've got chronographs, they have GMTs. And so if you kind of like this general template but want maybe some more functionality or something a bit more tooly, they have that as well, and you don't need to go like a vintage inspired route or a dive watch in order to get that functionality in a classically styled modern package.
Right.
So I think between those 4 models, it kind of rounds out vintage, modern, diver,
classic,
air, kind of classic. But they do also produce dress watches, and that's our 5th pick here.
Okay.
The Artelier collection. If you like the Big Crown ProPilot series, but think it might be a little bit too casual, maybe that you want that more as your weekend watch, but you wear more of a suit or something around the office, the Artelier collection are those traditional, classically styled dress watches, if you will, and again, also available with a ton of complications. But this one's a bit special. This one is the 110 years limited edition, so it's in a solid 18 karat gold case with a 10-day power reserve. You can see how massive that mainspring barrel is, and it's an in-house movement too, which is not something Oris does, but not a ton. Most of the watches we've seen up until this point kind of hover in that $1,000 to $3,000 range. This is almost 5 figures, but when you're talk about an 18 karat gold case and in-house movement, 110 piece limited edition. That it makes more sense.
It is, and all that aside, this is a gorgeous watch.
Yeah, it's a beautiful watch.
In terms of dress watch, for me, it's classic enough to have that really beautiful, clean dress watch feel, but also like I love the complications on it. Like I love the subdials and that big power reserve on there. I know that's kind of divisive. Some people are in, some people are out. Personally, I love it, and especially that it's that 10-day power reserve, which is kind of special.
10 days.
Yes,
that's 10 days.
We've talked about this before. To me, that's awesome because the difference between 2 and 3 days, it's like maybe I'm wearing the watch like once a week. So between 2 and 3 days, like I'm still gonna have to reset it.
At 10 days, even if you don't wear it even once a week, you're covered.
I'm still back, and I'm still on time with this one. So I think the 10-day power reserve is really cool. And I just love the styling. I love the gold. And the 12 and 6 o'clock numbers, how they kind of balance on the top and bottom, and then you have the subdials on the side. It's like there's a lot going on, but it's not crowded. It's still really classy and really clean, and this is a gorgeous one, man. I love it.
It's a really pretty watch, and it's also like, it's the enigma. It's the exception to every rule about Oris.
Very exceptional.
Probably the thing you hear most about Oris is how they are, they kill it in the affordable luxury segment. Between $1,000 and $3,000 is where they play happiest. They often use ETA movements and really deliver at that price point. This is an in-house movement. It is not on the affordable side.
Right.
It's using a complex in-house movement at that. It's in solid gold, which isn't something they do all that often. It's a limited edition, and then if you just look at the level of detailing on this movement versus, a standard Sellita ETA base that you'd find in their other watches,
it's immediately discernible that this is, very well done, very high end, really nice. I love that giant sapphire case back that really lets you see everything going on.
Yeah,
it's all finished. It's just really beautifully done. And I like it is outside it's outside Oris's wheelhouse in terms of price, right? It's significantly more expensive than the other 4 watches we have on the table today, but it's justifiable. Too many times I see a watch that's really expensive because it's some limited edition or, for whatever reason, then you start looking at it and you're like, well, why is it so expensive? Why is it 2, 3, 10 times more than something else? This one, it kind of makes sense why it's so much. And it's, we're talking it's expensive in terms of Rolex, but you start comparing it to other dress watches, some Patek or Lange, these other things, and it becomes a pretty good deal.
Yeah, 10 days, you see 8-day power reserve on a Panerai is a noteworthy thing that they put on the Dow. They've beat them by 2 days and they put an 18-karat gold case on top of it. And yeah, I think that's an excellent point. When you look at the $8,000 to $10,000 price category for solid gold dress watches, this is punching above its weight class, which is the exact same statement you'd say about the Divers 65 at around like $1,500.
Right.
And I think that's kind of one of those things we often say. One of the things people love about Seiko is how Seiko impresses it. Whether you're dealing with a few $100 or a $20,000 Grand Seiko, they deliver at every price level. And Oris does well. They don't often play in the north of 5-figure territory, but when they do, it's a really
it's a very good showing.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and Oris is a very enthusiast brand. It's probably
Definitely.
not the first name out of someone's mouth who doesn't like watches, but anyone who's into watches almost has a soft spot for Oris, even if they don't own any themselves.
Right.
And for the Oris collector who might have a few of the more common pieces, what is kind of that halo piece in your collection that is, not just discernibly different, but also just that next step up.
Yeah.
And it's this
That's
watch.
it. Yeah, absolutely.
And keep in mind, I think we're selling this watch for less than the price of like a steel Submariner. So all things considered,
when you start comparing,
it's not that expensive.
It becomes a pretty good value. Yeah. Okay, so we've seen some really cool and really different Orises today.
We have, and from very different ends of the collection. Why don't we do something a bit different today? Instead of just picking our favorite, why don't we rank them?
Okay. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, okay. Well, for me, I'm obviously going to take the Oris Artelier 110 years limited edition. I mean, like as we always say, unlimited budget, got to keep it.
Right.
This is so special. 110 pieces, that's a legitimate limited edition. How many solid gold Orises are out there? That's my obvious pick. For second, though, I'm going to go with the Divers 65. I really like this two-tone with bronze one, but as a whole, I think the Divers 65 is just a great everyday watch. You get the water resistance of a diver, you get the that day-to-day functionality of a rotating timing bezel, but it's not so balls to the walls, tool-y diver that it's just going to clash with a suit or just be a cumbersome presence on your wrist. Third, I've got to go with probably Oris's most iconic, emblematic design. I don't know if I necessarily pick this one. I might go with that blue or red dial that we were talking about or something, or maybe one of the bronze ones with the green.
But the pointer date line.
But yeah, I would choose a pointer date. If I was gonna only buy one Oris, not necessarily these models, I'd probably pick a pointer date.
Yeah.
And then the Aquis. you know, I don't love that I can't replace the bracelet, but at the same time, as a kind of go anywhere, do anything, forget about it sports watch, I really like it, and I'm sure I'll be able to find a color. Some of the new sizes in with the caliber 400 I really like as well. And then honestly, I feel weird putting the Big Crown ProPilot at the end because I like so much about it. I can't come up with any objections to it.
Right.
And I think that might be why it's actually in the last place. It's so agreeable that it's not divisive enough to like inspire some, you know, a harder take from me, but to say it's my least favorite isn't quite accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of great watches here, right? So it's some tough competition.
So what about you? How?
Okay, so I actually will be a little bit different.
Okay.
So my first choice, and we're just talking about, we're not talking about price. We're just talking about, I'm wearing these. That's the watch, right?
Keep them.
So number one, I got to go with the classic pointer date. Like you said, I love the black, but I would probably choose maybe that deep maroon color, one of the bronze ones. It's just such a classic watch. I love the pointer date. There's not a lot of watches that do that, and to me, it's so Oris that is just got to be my first choice. Next, I love the Divers 65. I think it's
kicking it off on the vintage end
I
first.
like the classics, especially with Oris. Oris has so much history, and you know they've been around forever, and they've really stuck to their you know their original styling and inspiration, and I love that. And again, there's so many Divers 65s that I don't think someone could ever find one that you know wouldn't fit what they want. So personally, I love this one. I think the two-tone with the steel and the bronze is so original that you know it's on the top of the list for me. Next, I'm going with the
wondering
dress.
when we were going to see this guy.
And I do love this watch. However, I'm not a huge dress watch wearer. I do wear them, but it's much less often than I wear the divers or sports or other things. So in terms of dress watches, I think this one is fantastic, and it lands right in the middle for me. Next, I'm actually going to give this guy a little bit of love. I know you felt bad about putting it on the bottom, even though it's the bottom of a great group.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a good watch. I'm glad you're putting it here.
It is, and I kind of chose it for that reason that you may have overlooked it, where I think it's really easy. I can throw it on, wear it with just about anything. You know, it's comfortable, it's a great looking watch, nothing maybe crazy special about it, but it's just a nice watch all around. And then finally, I'm going to go with the Aquis, and I like the Aquis. I love the way it looks. I think there's so many cool styles to it. I like the modernness. The big gripe with me on this one is the integrated bracelet. While I do like the bracelet, I love changing the straps, and I just love that flexibility. And for me, it's a little bit of a hang-up to be, you know, to be kind of locked into that integrated bracelet. So really, for that reason alone, that's probably why it ends up as my last choice on here. But I think it's a great looking watch. If it had traditional lugs and I can put it on something else, it would likely be at the top of the list.
Yeah, I kind of went back and forth on that as well because I do like to swap out straps, but then I'm also trying to be honest with myself on, if I had a Nautilus, would I really want to take the bracelet off?
Right.
No.
It's a very opinion thing. Some people really love integrated bracelets. Some people, it makes no difference to them whatsoever. And then some people, like myself, I take a few points off for it just because that, like you said, in practicality, I don't know how often it would really be a detriment that, I'm finding myself disappointed I can't change it to something. But it's one of my criteria, and it was part of my decision.
Yeah, although if I was using my Aquis as an actual diver, I would definitely put it on a rubber strap.
Yeah.
Just it's easier to get a fit over a wetsuit when dealing with just the way your wrist will compress with something that has a little flex in it. One important note, I mean, most people are going to be wearing these as their daily watches, but these are kind of an all or nothing form of a diver's extension.
Right.
So it's great if you're using a thick suit, but if you just need to cinch it a bit down tighter over like a 3-mil wetsuit. Yeah.
I do really like that Oris offers it in the rubber strap option, and so even though it's an integrated bracelet, it's not like you're stuck to that bracelet and that alone.
Right,
like
and
you do have options.
And they make models like this that, yes, it's a professional dive watch, but it's its intended market base is above land. They also make some really no holds bars, really ultra professional. You probably should only wear it diving type of watches. It's a giant mass and has features that you'll never need on land, like a helium escape valve.
Right.
So if you really do want a professional dive watch, Oris has you covered. But if you want a watch that can be a professional dive watch that 90% of the time you won't be diving in, you know,
There you
I
go.
really do see them
Yeah.
on that one. So those are our picks, but we want to hear yours. Don't forget to tell us those in the comments below. And also feel free to chime in on whether you prefer my picks or Justin's as well. And also, if there's any other brands that you want us to cover, make sure you tell us so that we can give you those in an upcoming video. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can stay up to date on our latest video content. We'll see you next time.